I was lying in a hospital bed, my abdomen still aching with a dull, hollow pain after last night's miscarriage. The doctor said I needed complete rest. I held my empty belly, eyes swollen. Ethan Caldwell, my husband, walked in at exactly 2:07 p.m., wearing a neatly pressed gray suit and a tightly knotted tie. No flowers, no soup, just a stack of documents clipped to a hard folder. He placed it on the table, right next to the glass of water I hadn't even touched, and calmly flipped through the pages like he was preparing for a court hearing. Post-miscarriage contract addendum. I froze. Clause 4.1.3. If the childbearing plan is delayed due to the health of one party, all resulting nutrition and care expenses will be solely covered by that party. I stared at his lips moving, but couldn't hear a single ounce of warmth from the man I had loved for 5 years, lived with for 3. He paused, not to ask if I was in pain, but to turn to the next page. Of course, the time I spend taking care of you will be billed at my standard hourly consultation rate. I'll give you a 20% discount. A discount for his wife, right after she lost their baby. I felt something drop inside my chest, so heavy and empty it didn't even make a sound. Ethan Caldwell, my husband, a highly praised divorce attorney in Manhattan, the best at making sure every risk in marriage never falls on him. He once proudly walked me through every clause in our shared life. Prenuptial assets, completely separate. Post-marriage income, calculated by percentage. Who buys Christmas gifts for both sets of parents, precisely budgeted. Housework, converted into labor value, worth 20% of his monthly income. He said, "Ava, this is what modern marriage looks like. Clear, fair. No room for arguments or heartbreak." Back then, I believed him. I thought, that was just the romantic logic of a man who worked with law, loving by protecting. I used to feel safe when he said, "If you choose to be a housewife, I'll transfer money every month." Fair and transparent, I naively thought that was how he loved, using legal terms to make me feel secure. But today, lying in this blindingly white hospital room, IV mark still fresh on my hand, I finally understood. Everything he gave me wasn't security, wasn't love. It was a cold, unequal labor contract, disguised as a marriage. And I, the secondary party of a soulless agreement, was drained of every emotional value, and in the end, even the cost of my recovery had to be paid for by me. The cramp hit again, a violent wave dragging me back to the brutal truth, that this body once held a tiny little life, and now it didn't. My hand clenched the edge of the hospital bedsheet, and that white fabric felt colder than the heart of the man standing in front of me. The father of that child, instead of placing a hand on my shoulder, instead of holding my hand to help me get through this pain, was calmly calculating every single caregiving fee, every incurred expense, with me. His voice rang out clearly, every word stiff and cold, like a lawyer reading terms to a client. Not a single tremble of emotion. Every sentence he said reeked of condescension, as if I should be grateful that he was even here. I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I knew too well. With someone like Ethan, tears would only make him more convinced he was right. Emotions, in his world, meant nothing. The only things he believed in were signatures, black and white print, clauses that left no room for a heart. I took a slow breath, then held out my weak hand in front of him. "Give me the pen." Ethan paused, not out of concern, but out of surprise that things were going smoother than he expected. He opened his expensive leather briefcase. The sound of the zipper cut through the quiet room like a blade through air, then pulled out a sleek, pitch-black Mont Blanc pen. A pen that had signed countless contracts, bringing him victory. The nib touched paper, and I signed, stroke by stroke, Ava Caldwell, The ink bled onto the page like a fresh wound torn open. Irrevocable. Permanent. Ethan nodded in satisfaction, the corner of his mouth curling just slightly, the kind of smile someone makes when they think they've just secured a smart deal. He carefully slipped the addendum back into his file folder like it was the greatest achievement of the day. But just as he turned to leave, I spoke, my voice so calm even I was surprised. Ethan, you're right. Everything should follow the contract. He stopped, turned to look at me. In those eyes, I saw triumph. I looked straight at him, not flinching, not weak. I wanted him to remember this moment. From now on, I said slowly, each word like a nail driven into the cold metal table, we will live exactly by what you've written. A flicker of doubt passed through his eyes. Brief, but I caught it. Then he nodded, thinking it was my submission. He didn't know that when I signed that paper, the love I had for him ended too. All that's left between us now is a contract. And I, Ava Caldwell, will learn to play this game better than the man who wrote it. On the day of my discharge, Ethan didn't come to pick me up. Instead, he sent a cold text with a screenshot of a paid Uber trip. The fare has been covered. As per agreement, this is the transportation duty expected of a spouse. I looked at the phone and laughed, the kind of laugh of someone who no longer hoped for comfort from him. Fine. When I got back to the place we called home, everything was as I had left it, tidy, but the kind of cold, sterile order that comes from a life programmed by clauses. Ethan was sitting on the sofa with his MacBook open. When I walked in, he didn't look up, just nodded toward the coffee table where a sheet of A4 lay printed with dense categories. Con Ed, water, gas, service fees, each item listed clearly. This is this month's utility bill. I've split it according to the contract. Remember to pay your share on time, he said. And, as if that weren't enough, handed over another page, a list of supplements I needed after the miscarriage. I consulted a nutritionist and paid upfront at Whole Foods. Please reimburse me. He paused. Then, as if suddenly remembering, added, Of course, you'll also need to cover the nutritionist's consultation fee. Each word fell into the room like a cold stone. I did what he expected, pulled out my phone, transferred each payment one by one, feeling like my hand was operating some kind of machinery. But just as he was about to turn back to his keyboard, I spoke, and my voice was so calm, it even surprised me. Ethan. His hand froze. The typing stopped. I stepped closer, looked directly at his face, and asserted my rights using the exact tool he had taught me. According to Clause 3.1 of the Household Work Agreement Addendum, cleaning of shared living areas is the responsibility of both parties. During my hospitalization, you were the sole user of the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. You generated all the household waste. Based on the principle of rights and responsibilities, this cleaning should fall entirely on you, shouldn't it? I spoke steadily, each word clear. Ethan's typing hand paused. He looked momentarily stunned, seemingly not expecting me to suddenly cite a clause like that. In his eyes, I had always been the good wife who followed the rules, not someone who could wield them. Correct, he muttered dryly. I continued, growing more confident with every word. Furthermore, under Clause 2.4 on quantifying housework labor, I've calculated, you generate an average of 0.5 kilograms of waste per day. Routine cleaning takes 15 minutes. I was hospitalized for 5 days. That's a total of 2.5 kilograms, equivalent to 75 minutes of work. Based on the standard house cleaning rate of $45 per hour, the labor value comes to $56.25. You can either clean it yourself or pay that amount for me to do it later. I spoke in his tone, cold, precise, emotionless, and for the first time, the man who always prided himself on legal logic completely lost his composure. Ethan's face changed. A grim look clearly crept onto his forehead. Ethan, do you really have to calculate things this far? He asked, slightly irritated. I smiled and repeated, emphasizing every word he once said to me. You taught me this, Ethan. You said, this is what modern marriage looks like. Clear, fair. The sentence hit him like a mirror to the face. He fell silent, conceded with a short huff, then pulled out a $100 bill from his wallet and slapped it onto the table with a clipped tone. Keep the change. He stormed into his office as if fleeing from a pointless debate. I looked at the bill, slowly picked it up, and slipped it into my pocket. This was the first counterstrike. From today on, everything he ever imposed on me will be returned, doubled, in his own language. Clauses, evidence, and numbers. I want him to witness firsthand what a house built entirely on contracts looks like, so he'll understand just how cold a home becomes when love is reduced to legal terms. From that day on, our home officially turned into a literal contract enforcement site. I was no longer the woman who silently cleaned and waited for him to transfer 20% labor value, the thing he used to call a fair wage for a modern wife. I downloaded the Toggle app on my phone, the countdown interface ticking like a time clock in a factory shift. Every time I started cooking, doing laundry, or mopping the floor, I hit start. Every minute, every second, recorded precisely. I created a detailed price list, printed in bold. Washing one dress shirt, $5. Ironing one pair of slacks, $8. Cooking dinner, $80. Ingredients billed separately. Mopping, $40 per session. I placed the list somewhere impossible to miss, right in the kitchen where we once laughed together, so that every time he opened the fridge or reached for water, he would see the price of every action I once did out of love. At the end of the month, I sent Ethan an invoice. He opened the file, saw an itemized breakdown more detailed than any client billing at his law office. Start time, 18:04, end time, 19:22. Task, meal preparation, dinner, healthy diet plan. His face went pale, jawline stiffened, but he couldn't argue, because the entire price list was based on the exact document he once cited to defend a client in a divorce case. That document I had accidentally found in our shared Google Drive folder. With no way around it, Ethan had no choice but to transfer the money quietly. From then on, our conversations turned into a daily courtroom, with each of us acting like lawyers clinging to clauses. In the evening, as he turned on the TV to watch football, I spoke up. Ethan, according to Clause 5.3 in the addendum, personal rest time begins at 11 p.m. Please mute the volume. Your noise is violating my right to rest. The remote in his hand froze, and the TV screen reflected his distorted face. The next day, during a meal, he frowned and said, Ava, this soup is too salty. It doesn't meet the healthy eating standards we agreed on in Clause 2.7. I have the right to request a remake. I smiled. Sure. But this is a personal preference, so the remake will be billed separately. The living room sank into silence. The only sound was the cold hum of the AC, and two people sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, no longer calling each other husband and wife, only Party A and Party B. We lived like roommates splitting bills, charging our phones in separate outlets, labeling our food with name tags, drawing invisible boundaries around our sides of the fridge. Ethan started looking at me like I was a stranger. Maybe he thought I'd lost my mind. But no, for the first time in this marriage, I was truly clear-headed. I no longer dreamed of tenderness, nor needed him to look at me with pity. I tracked every cent, every clause, every reaction, not to be petty, but to remind myself that once love is reduced to a contract, it suffocates under numbers. I had no more illusions about Ethan, and when you have no more illusions, you stop feeling hurt. All that remained was silence, and the ticking of the timer on my phone, still counting every passing second of a marriage that had already expired. During the day, I did housework, on time, by the book. No overtime, no delays. I was no longer a devoted wife in his eyes, but an employee following company protocol. The rest of the time, I turned into someone else, someone learning how to strike back. I read everything: marriage and family law, contract law, the civil code. Pages full of dry, cold legal language. I took notes on every line, underlined every clause, every word, turning into a weapon. I knew clearly that simply responding with rules wasn't enough. Ethan wasn't just a cold-hearted man. He was a legal expert, someone who believed that the law was an impenetrable shield. And the prenuptial agreement he drafted, the one he called a fair condition, was the very knife I had to learn to turn around. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell flew up from Florida to visit their son. Ethan showed up in a gray suit, once again, with a freshly drafted contract. "Temporary agreement on duties and responsibilities during parental visit," he said, placing the stack of papers on the table, sitting across from me, beginning to read each clause aloud. It laid out in detail everything I was expected to do, including reminding them to take their medication and driving them to doctor's appointments. I picked up the papers, read them carefully. I nodded, then looked up, my voice light, like a gentle reminder. "Ethan, I think this version is quite thorough. It's just that—" I paused, deliberately letting the silence stretch for a few seconds. "There's one small detail we should add." He narrowed his eyes slightly, wary. "What detail?" I pointed to the bottom corner of the page and gave a soft smile. "This draft lists all the duties, but not the rights. What if your parents appreciate my care and want to give me a gift or transfer some money? According to our main contract, any assets received during marriage that aren't clearly stated as separate property are considered joint property. To avoid trouble later, I think we should clarify this in an added clause." Ethan was silent for a few seconds, his eyes darkening. I could see him analyzing, trying to unpack my words for hidden intent. But I didn't blink, sitting upright, my voice still sweet, as if I was just helping him polish his own legal masterpiece. I knew he'd agree, because in Ethan Caldwell's world, nothing thrilled him more than a tighter contract. And that's exactly what happened. Pride won over suspicion. He picked up the pen, wrote in the blank space, carefully forming each word. During the visit of Party A's parents, if Party B, namely Ava Caldwell, receives cash or material gifts from the in-laws in exchange for satisfactory service, it shall be considered personal labor compensation and thus the sole property of Party B. When he finished writing, he even blew gently to dry the ink, then nodded, pleased. "Now it's perfect." I looked at the line, the ink not yet dry, and held back a smile. "Ethan, you just signed a trap. A legal trap, written in the language you love most, clauses and evidence." Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell arrived, polite, kind, but with eyes that kept their distance. I gave it everything I had, exactly as the agreement outlined: 3 main meals and 2 snacks per day, a balanced menu, salt and sugar measured by the gram, with a kitchen scale. The warm water pitcher placed precisely where it should be. Morning and evening pills reminded by the hour, logged into an iPad in bar and line graph formats for easy tracking. Afternoon drives to the park, quiet evening chats, asking gentle questions to let them revisit their favorite memories. At first, they seemed a little reserved, but soon enough, they were completely won over by my professionalism and thoughtfulness. My dedication genuinely moved his parents. More than once, they complimented me. Ethan sat beside them, his expression mixed, part of him pleased to see his reputation held up in front of his parents, another part uneasy, realizing the service I was delivering far exceeded expectations. So cold, so professional, it made him feel like a stranger in his own home. Half a month went by, and our apartment operated like a mini assisted living facility, with me as the most competent nurse on shift. Not a speck of dust in the living room, dinner napkins folded to precision, the faint scent of eucalyptus and toasted bread drifting through the air. The night before they left, Mrs. Caldwell took my hand and insisted on giving me $2,000. Ethan stood there, witnessing the entire thing, not objecting, because everything fell within the parameters of the temporary contract he himself had drafted. After sending them off, we returned home. He glanced over the spotless living room, saw the dinner table already set, and for once said, "Thank you, that must have been exhausting." I smiled calmly. "Not at all. This falls within the scope of my duties." After all, it came with compensation. I held up my phone, tilted it slightly to show the $2,000 transfer notification. Ethan's expression darkened, and he said nothing. He thought that was the end of it. He thought I was satisfied with the money. He underestimated me. I never wanted the money. What I was after was the sentence written by his own hand, confirming that household service could be rewarded with cash and would be considered the separate property of Party B. That was the key. And with that key, I could unlock the most critical door in this entire matter: the legal recognition of domestic labor in marriage. I dug into Ethan's Google Drive and found a folder compiling the cases he had handled. There was one case where a full-time housewife demanded compensation during divorce. The defendant, represented by Ethan, denied everything. Cannot be quantified. No legal grounds, in the end. The wife walked away nearly empty-handed because of a prenuptial agreement. I read Ethan's bold courtroom arguments. Emotional contributions cannot be converted into monetary value, and therefore cannot be used in asset division. I closed the screen and saw my own reflection. Now I would use him to shatter the very logic that pushed so many women into legal dead ends. Everything was in place. All that was missing was the final piece, a reason that would make divorce justifiable. I didn't have to wait long. 1 month later, Ethan brought a girl home. Very young, very pretty, high ponytail, crisp white shirt collar, short skirt showing off her long legs, and a shiny name tag, Kylie Brooks. He introduced her as the new intern. "We're working on a big project. Lots of overtime lately. For convenience, she'll be temporarily staying in the living room." Then, he placed a stack of papers in front of me. Temporary cohabitation agreement. All clauses clearly stated. No using my personal items, no entry into the master bedroom, all arising costs to be covered by him. On paper, nothing seemed out of line. But I knew, a man like Ethan never randomly brings a young, beautiful colleague home. Maybe nothing had happened yet, but he was laying the groundwork for his next relationship, changing things slowly, getting me used to it, numbing me, waiting for me to quietly back out. Too bad, I wasn't going to give him that chance. That night, I heard the sound of water falling steadily behind the guest bathroom curtain. Heard Ethan knocking on the door with the excuse of bringing a warm glass of milk, speaking softly, and chuckling outside. I lay in the dark, hand resting on my flat stomach. The child I had lost seemed to whisper, "It's time." I opened my contacts, clicked on a name I had spent weeks narrowing down. Attorney Klein. The phone connected, and I said one sentence. "Hi, I'm ready." The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds. Ethan and Kylie sat side by side at the breakfast table, murmuring things they called work, lightly brushing each other's arms, accidentally, eyes meeting, and quickly looking away. I wore a dark dress, light makeup, and carried a thick set of documents. I placed them in front of Ethan. He frowned, annoyed. "Ava, can't you see I'm busy?" "If there's something, just—" But before he could finish, his eyes caught the bold title on the cover page. Divorce Agreement. Ethan's face darkened. Kylie froze, her spoonful of cereal suspended in midair. "Haven't you done enough already?" Ethan muttered, trying to contain his anger. I looked straight into his eyes. "This isn't drama. I'm here to inform you, we are getting a divorce." He leaned back, arms crossed, the smug smile returning to his face. "Divorce? Fine. Did you forget our prenup, Ava? You walk away with only your premarital savings. This house, my income, none of it is yours. Are you sure about this?" I shook my head gently, unzipped my bag, and laid another thick file on the table. No, you're mistaken. I opened the folder, my voice calm but as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Ethan, the one leaving this house, leaving this marriage, is you. He looked at me, then laughed. A short, dry, condescending laugh, like I had just told him a cheap joke. But the moment I slid the folder toward him, and his fingers flipped open the first page, that laugh died instantly. The morning light hit the dining table, reflecting off the crisp white paper, and the very first page wasn't some emotional letter. It was a lawyer's notice, professionally printed, formal, bearing the silver embossed seal of one of the most prestigious law firms. I saw his fingers tense, the soft rustle of paper filling the air. I smiled. My voice was still gentle, but every word landed like a hammer on the table. This is the first gift I'm giving you, Attorney Ethan. He looked up, brows furrowed, but I continued, slowly. Sent by my legal representative, to you, the respondent. The mocking smirk on his lips froze. His eyes locked onto the top corner of the document, and the name printed there drained the color from his face. It wasn't one of those third-tier firms he used to scoff at when reading industry news. It was one of the top firms, his direct competitor, and at the bottom of the letter, the signature of Sarah Klein stood out, bold and sharp, a name every legal circle in Manhattan knew. The woman who took impossible cases and won. Ethan was silent for a moment, then tried to collect himself, or rather, pretended to. He leaned on the table, muttering through clenched teeth. Sarah Klein. Looks like you've prepared well. He flipped a few pages, scoffing. But is this it, Ava? You think you're going to beat me with just this? Next to him, Kylie sat frozen, cheeks flushed red. She wanted to leave but didn't dare, just stared down at her cold coffee. I didn't react to his sarcasm. I simply turned to page 2, my fingers tracing the surface of the paper. You're right, I replied softly. Just a household labor invoice isn't enough. That's why I needed leverage, a legal foundation for that labor to be recognized. I pulled from the folder a familiar document, the temporary agreement for hosting parents he himself had drafted. I slid it toward him, pointing to the bottom corner, where the sentence he had handwritten with a Mont Blanc pen was still visible. During the period of hosting the parents, if the female party, Ava Caldwell, is compensated in cash or kind by the male party's parents for quality service, it shall be considered personal labor income and belong solely to the female party. I looked at him, eyes no longer trembling, but cold and clear enough to make him turn away. Ethan, I said, voice low, you were the one who acknowledged that my household service has commercial value and that it could be paid in cash. You were the one who turned our marital duties into a quantifiable, billable service contract. I paused, offering a smile that was almost pitying. That contract was the lever you handed me yourself. Ethan's throat moved slightly. I saw him swallow. His legal instinct recognized immediately the danger in that single sentence. That was a one-off. My parents' visit doesn't establish legal precedent. He snapped. Really? I answered calmly, then played a video on my phone, the one I had accidentally recorded, capturing the moment Mrs. Caldwell handed me the money. Her voice rang clearly in the clip. It was payment for 2 weeks of hard work. I turned to the next piece, text messages between me and my mother-in-law. I kept speaking evenly, softly, but every word hit like a precise bullet. You see, your parents, the legal representatives of Party A, explicitly stated that the payment was compensation for my labor. That's enough to form a complete chain of evidence. The domestic work I performed had crossed the threshold of marital duty and entered the realm of paid service. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice slowing, almost like delivering a verdict. And you, a marriage attorney, personally drafted and signed that contract. Legally, you have acknowledged a paid service model within the marriage. Based on that precedent, I now have grounds to demand full compensation for all labor exceeding standard spousal obligations over the past 3 years. The air thickened. The ticking of the wall clock sounded loud and eerie. Kylie's jaw dropped, her wide eyes shifting from pity to disbelief. Ethan sat still, fists clenched white. I pushed the final document to the center of the table. This is the wage calculation I did, based on premium rates for housekeepers, nannies, nutritionists, high-end household managers, combined with the valuation report on domestic labor you once used in a previous divorce defense. I looked up at him. This is what you owe me. I stood. The light from the window cast a shadow between us, splitting our silhouettes in two. Ethan remained, seated, face pale, lips pressed shut, unable to say a word. I looked at him, voice steady, each word cold and unwavering. My request is simple. This house becomes mine, and we divorce quietly. If not, I let the sentence hang, picked up my bag, and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, there was only the faint scrape of a wooden chair on the floor, and a man who once thought he always won, now sitting in silence, surrounded by legal folders. I moved out, rented a room in a hotel, and gave Ethan 3 days to think. During those 3 days, I didn't text, didn't wait anxiously for a response. I gave myself a new schedule, enrolled in a flower arrangement class, attended lectures, read books, and spoke with my attorney. Every afternoon, I sat across from attorney Sarah Klein on screen, hearing her say, "Ava, you're the calmest and smartest client I've ever had." And I simply smiled. That wasn't intelligence. That was being cornered. When someone is pushed to the edge of a cliff, they either fall to pieces or grow wings and fly. On the third afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan's voice was tired, hoarse, stripped of arrogance. "Let's meet," he said, asking to meet at the cafe near our old apartment, the place we used to go every Saturday night. When I arrived, he was already there. In front of him was my file, now covered in red marks and underlines made by him, and he began speaking in his lawyer tone. "I've reviewed all your documents. Your legal argument is novel, I'll admit, but not without loopholes. The term paid service can be interpreted in many ways. A judge may not rule in your favor." I cut him off before he could go further. "Ethan, you don't need to analyze the law for me. The fact that you made this call proves you already know the odds you're facing in court." I looked straight into his eyes and continued, "Or more accurately, you just can't stand the idea of losing." I reminded him that a public trial would shatter the image of the brilliant attorney he had so carefully built. His reputation, his career, his credibility, all of it would be destroyed. And that was Ethan's true fear. He pressed his lips together, sat silent for a long moment, then slumped back like a man drained of all strength. "What do you want?" "I've already told you," I replied. He tried to negotiate, voice weary. "The house, Ava, you're asking too much. I can give you $500,000 at most. Let's call it compensation." I laughed. "Ethan, you still don't get it. This isn't compensation. This is you paying the wages you owe me." His face flushed with rage, words caught in his throat, but I didn't give him a chance to explode. Instead, I calmly pulled out a new set of documents from my bag, placing them softly on the table. The cover read, in bold print, "Legal opinion on the signs of coercion and exploitation of vulnerability in the signing of the supplementary agreement." His fingers trembled slightly as he read it. I spoke coldly. "Do you remember the agreement you had me sign in the hospital?" "Where it stated that after my miscarriage, I would bear all expenses, and you would bill me for your time caring for me by the hour?" He avoided my gaze. I continued. "I consulted my attorney and reviewed the relevant clauses. In a state of physical and emotional vulnerability after surgery, you, my husband, and a professional attorney, took advantage of my helplessness and lack of legal understanding to pressure me into signing an unfair contract." I clearly repeated the legal term Sarah had explained to me. In law, that's called exploitation of situational vulnerability. A contract signed under such conditions can be ruled invalid. And if your coercion and abuse of professional position are confirmed, I can file an ethics complaint with the Bar Association. I leaned forward, my voice steely. Ethan, think about it. If clients, opponents, or the ethics board found out that you didn't even spare your wife right after a miscarriage, what would they think of you? Would you still have your license? The spoon in his hand fell to the floor, the sound of metal hitting tile sharp and echoing. Ethan's face turned ghost white, like someone who had their spine ripped out, collapsing into his chair, eyes hollow. I knew I had just played my strongest card, the final blow. Before this, I went after money. This time, I aimed for his career, his pride, his status, because everything he had ever built could turn to ash because of one flimsy piece of paper. In the end, Ethan relented. His eyes on me, blended with disbelief, frustration, and a trace of fear, as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing the woman standing in front of him. Maybe he had never imagined that Ava Caldwell, the obedient wife he once dismissed as legally clueless, could use nothing but reason, composure, and her own wounds to push him into a corner. He thought he had everything under control, but he never understood that when a woman stops loving, her pain can turn into a silent force nothing can withstand. I agree, he said quietly, voice hoarse and exhausted, like a man surrendering after a long war. The house, it's yours. Give it up. I smiled softly and replied, No, Ethan. You're not giving it up. You're paying the wages you owed me. He looked at me for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh, a laugh stripped of pride, hollow and tired. What followed happened surprisingly quietly. We signed the divorce agreement at attorney Sarah Klein's office. The room was bright and white, a breeze from the window fluttering the pages of the contract with a soft rustle. Ethan was silent the entire time, except when signing. His knuckles turned pale from gripping the pen too tightly. Once done, he stood, didn't look at me, and walked out. His figure grew smaller, frail, and lost, like someone who had just lost everything he once believed was his. Sarah Klein gently placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice warm and calm. Congratulations, Ava. You're free now. I looked up through the large glass window. Sunlight poured over the city buildings, golden and soft like honey. I exhaled. Yes, I was free. Stepping out of the office, I saw Kylie standing across the street. She wore a long coat, her face visibly uncertain. When she saw Ethan walk out, she immediately approached, reaching out to touch him. But he brushed her hand away, his gaze blank, then kept walking without looking back. Kylie froze, staring after him, then turned to look at me, her eyes softening, perhaps in pity, perhaps in understanding. I gave a small nod, said nothing, and turned away, walking in the opposite direction. I don't know what will happen to them after this, and truthfully, I no longer care. The sky above was crystal clear, sunlight warming my shoulders in a strange, gentle way. I walked slowly, letting each breath, each step melt into the flow of people. No more rush, no more weight to carry. I was no longer the woman bound by contracts. I was myself again, whole, complete, someone quietly being reborn. On the way home, I stopped in front of a small flower shop. The scent of lavender drifted in the breeze. I chose a bouquet of white tulips, the flower of new beginnings. As the door closed behind me, I knew I had stepped into a new chapter. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't come from defeating someone, but from no longer needing to prove anything. And maybe, if I had to say one thing to close it all, I'd say, sometimes the strongest thing in this world isn't revenge, but the courage to begin again. If you've ever felt like I did, lost, then found yourself again, leave a comment. I want to hear your story. Hit subscribe so you won't miss more true stories about women who turned heartbreak into strength.